So let's get started. How many of you were at the last lecture? Buddhism. Okay, a great number of you. That's wonderful. Well, we're going to start off with a little bit of an intro again into Buddhism, just to enlighten those who haven't been yet. So the Buddha, known as the Enlightened One, the man who was to become the Buddha, was born Siddhartha Gautama around 2,600 years ago as a prince in a small territory. He was born of the warrior class, which means that there's four classes. You have the Brahmin class, and then you have Kshatriya class. He was born into the Kshatriya class, which is the warrior class. And he had everything that he could imagine. He had unimaginable wealth. He had freedom. He could do whatever he wanted, but he still couldn't find happiness. He couldn't find contentment. And so he left the home at the age of 29, and he went out to see the world. He went out seeking contentment, seeking some answers. When he left his home, what he found was that the world was filled with poverty and misery, anxiety, desperation. And he knew that he couldn't go back to his old life. And so, having experienced all this tremendous wealth, he decided that maybe it was the other way to go. Maybe he needed to deny himself, and that by denying himself, he would find the contentment that he sought. So he gave away all of his belongings. He gave away all of his possessions. And he even gave up on the relationships that he had in his life. He was married with a small child. He left those relationships behind as well to seek a new life of contentment. He went to all of the great religious leaders. He was Hindu. He went to all of the great religious leaders at the time and philosophers, and he tried to learn as much as he could, but he kept coming back with nothing. He wasn't happy. He even traveled the path of self-mortification, meaning that he would often deny himself for days and days at a time the basics of life, food. He would deny himself sleep. He would meditate for hours and hours, denying himself the basic pleasures of life. But then he discovered that that wasn't the path either. So he decided it wasn't the material path, it wasn't the denial of the material path, that it was what he would call the middle way. And it's a life of moderation. And this is what Siddhartha, who would later become the Buddha, decided. At the age of 35, he was sitting beneath the bo tree, and he decided to meditate. And so during this period of meditation, he became enlightened. For 40 days, he considered the hidden meanings of life. He considered all of the beauty that surrounded him, and he considered his path to enlightenment. And again, we see this number of 40, how it's the same number of days that John the Baptist went out into the desert, the same number of days that Jesus, the number of years that Moses and the Israelites were in the desert. This number 40 comes back to us many times through many faiths. Now we'll talk about the connection between Buddhism and Christianity. The question is, was Christianity influenced by Buddhism? And I'm going to show you some examples of how we might think that there were some influences. The history of Buddhism goes back 6 centuries before Christianity. So anything that we know about Christianity came to us 6 centuries after the start of Buddhism. So did Buddhism have any impact on Christian thinking? Some believe that Buddhism had an impact on Christianity back to its early days. And what I would say to you is, it probably had less of an impact on Christianity than it did on Jesus himself. So what I will talk about is, was Jesus impacted potentially by the teachings of the Buddha? Could that have been someone that he was aware of during his time on earth? Buddhism was known in the pre-Christian Greek world and later the Roman Empire through the campaigns of Alexander the Great. So the idea of Buddhism was not a foreign concept. Several prominent early Christian fathers, Clement of Alexandria and St. Jerome, were both aware and actually included the topic of Buddhism in their works. Buddhism may have also influenced early Christian history. So there's a possibility that Buddhism influenced early Christian development. It may have also influenced Gnosticism and then Christianity. So Gnosticism is a type of faith that came even before Christianity, which described God as a demiurge. So they said that there was the creator God, and then the Gnostics believed that there was a lesser God that was responsible for creation, and that when Jesus came along, then the Gnostics included Jesus in their thinking, and they said that Jesus really wasn't the Son of God, that Jesus was simply a prophet or someone who was a messenger, someone who conveyed God's message. So these were the thoughts that the early church fathers had to consider, and they decided that they were heretics, that the Gnostics were heretics, but all of these thoughts were going along in their minds. Could it be that Jesus wasn't the Son of God? Did we misunderstand it? And then we go back to the texts, and there's even some great historical criticism that talks about when we determined that Jesus, the church decided that Jesus was the Son of God as opposed to a Son of God. And it all is predicated on one single word in the Greek texts, which if it's mistranslated would change the difference between all of the beliefs in Christianity of Jesus as the Son of God versus the idea that at that time, much like in the 60s where we all said that we were children of peace and flower children, that during the time that Jesus was alive, that it was very common to say that they were children of God. That was part of this group. And could there have been a miscommunication or a misidentification of this single word, the difference between the Son of God or a Son of God? Consider the significance of one word and its impact on the whole of human history. The difference between the and a. Buddhism and Christianity are intrinsically different faiths. Despite some interesting analogies, there's fundamental differences between Buddhism and Christianity. Christianity talks about a triune Godhead, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Buddhism is non-theistic. There is no belief in a creator God, which provides very different insights into faith. There's really no evidence of any connection between Buddhism and Christianity. There's no historical evidence that shows that Buddhism had any impact on early Christianity. However, we'll talk about some of the possible influences. One of the things that's talked about is would the early monotheistic Galilean Jews have accepted the insights of people coming from the East, polytheistic views or pantheistic views. The idea is that they probably wouldn't have, much in the same way that today many of us turn our heads and our ears away from any talk of Islam. We don't want to hear about it. We've heard enough. In the same way, these people probably wouldn't have been open to the idea of hearing about other faiths other than their own Jewish faith. In fact, they didn't even want to hear from Jesus. So did Jesus learn any lessons from the Buddha? Well, there's no clear historical evidence that there was any connection whatsoever, but there are some interesting, plausible connections. First of all, there's evidence of trade between the two regions. Here you can see the routes of the silk and the spice routes. You can see here coming from India, across the ocean, going up into the Red Sea, all the way up into Jerusalem. There were direct routes that would have connected the ideas, connected through trade, the ideas from Buddhism and Hinduism all the way into the Middle East. The transport of goods along these routes relied upon pack animals and boats, and so they have evidence that goes back even 2,500 years before Christ, before Common Era, that these trade routes were active. And what we can infer from this is that they would have been talking to each other. We even hear the story in the Bible about the wise men who traveled from the area of Salala, where we had just visited, where they had the frankincense and the myrrh, that they would have traveled from these areas, taking with them their goods to present to the infant Jesus. And so the idea is that if in fact people were trading goods, wouldn't they have also traded ideas? Wouldn't they have shared ideas with each other? It's unreasonable to consider that people would have simply been involved on a business level without also discussing their faith, politics, worldviews, what they considered the idea of their world at the time, which was very limited. But it goes to say that they probably did talk to each other about faith. So while we can't say for certain that there's any direct historical connection, what we can say is that it's likely that the people during this period of time would certainly have known about Buddhism, and vice versa, that they may have known about Judaism in India. The Buddhists could have blended with locals. In fact, it was the historian philosopher Philo, who lived during Jesus' time, who actually recorded the presence of Buddhists in Egypt. So we hear historically that Buddhists were already traveling around the world. They were already getting the message of the Buddha out, and it was very common for them to fit into societies. Whenever you meet Buddhists, you'll generally see them to be very unassuming people today as they were then. They take on the culture that they live in, they try to fit in, they try to blend, and they offer different perspectives for the people living around them. And so people took notice of these people even as far back as 2,000 years ago. How are the life stories of the Buddha and Jesus similar? Well, there are a few similarities between them. Both of them fasted while they were traveling alone. We hear the period of the 40 days. They were both tempted. Jesus says that he was tempted by the devil in the desert. The Buddha was tempted by his own mind. He believed that temptation didn't come from external sources, that temptation came from within, from our own minds. They both started an itinerant ministry around the age of 30. They both had disciples. They both renounced worldly riches and asked their disciples to do the same. They both rebelled against the religious elite, believing that their message was the right message, and they encouraged their disciples, even before their death, to go out and to preach the message. How are the teachings of the Buddha and Jesus similar? They're similar in a number of aspects, but they both advocate what's become known as the Golden Rule, or for Buddhists, the Eternal Rule, which is to treat others as you wish to be treated. They both argue for a life of peace, of moderation, and returning love for anger. They both promote the ideas of do not kill, do not steal, don't slander, and they both stress the importance of helping and giving to others. And here are a few examples. The Buddha says, consider others as yourself. And Jesus says, do to others as you would have them do to you. Regarding loving others, Buddha said, let your thoughts of boundless love pervade the whole world. And Jesus says, this is my first commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Regarding loving your enemies, Buddha says, overcome anger by love, overcome evil by good, overcome the miser by giving, overcome the liar by truth. And Jesus says, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you. You can see how the messages are very similar, and yet the Christian message takes it one step further. The Buddhist message is one of acceptance and tolerance, and the Christian message always takes it a little bit further. It's not enough just to accept, but if someone slaps you, you return the other cheek. You just don't ignore it. You don't move away. The idea is that we continue to offer ourselves for abuse, that we continue to put ourselves in the position of giving ourselves as an example, as a sacrifice for others. So you can see some differences here, but consider that these ideas are very similar and they're 600 years apart. So the idea is that there could have been some impact on Christianity is very easy to see. Regarding turn the other cheek, Buddha says, if anyone should give you a blow with his hand, with a stick or with a knife, you should abandon any desires and utter no evil words. Say nothing when you've been harmed. And Jesus says, if anyone strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. Regarding helping one another, Buddha says, if you do not tend to one another, then who is there to tend to you? Whoever should tend to me, he should tend to the sick. And Jesus said, truly I tell you, just as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me. This same message again, that we are all one. That this idea of self is all an illusion. The idea that Jesus even tends to take this approach from a very Buddhist mentality, the idea that whatever you do to others, you do to me. And I believe that he meant that also in the way that whatever you do to each other, you do back to yourself. That because we are all connected, what you do to anyone, you do back to yourself. So the goal is to love one another as you would love to be loved, and to treat one another as you would want to be treated. Regarding judging others, Buddha says the fault of others is easily perceived, but that of oneself is difficult to perceive. A man winnows his neighbor's faults like chaff, but his own fault he hides. And Jesus says, judge not, that you not be judged. And why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye when you don't consider the plank in your own eye? Both very, very similar. Consider those quotes and how similar they are. The Buddha says regarding wealth, let us live most happily possessing nothing. And Jesus said, blessed are the poor, for the kingdom of heaven is yours. Did Jesus travel to India? There was talk among many scholars that Jesus may have even traveled that far. We knew that Jesus traveled over into Jordan. Did he go further? There's pretty much been a sound historical rejection that Jesus traveled that far and that he would have traveled to India or Tibet. We have no record of that. Obviously, we have no record at all, much of anything, after Jesus is teaching in the temple, which could have been at the age of up to 8 or 10. We hear a little bit about that, even up to the age of 13 possibly. And then we don't hear anything about Jesus again until he begins his ministry at around the age of 30. There are a number of very interesting books that were called the apocryphal works of the Bible. And these were the books of the Bible that were written, but were never selected as the official canon of the Bible. So if you're interested in reading some of these stories about what Jesus was like as a child, there's actually books out there. There's called The Gospel of Thomas, which is a wonderful book. It's a mystical story about Jesus, and it talks about him as a child. One of the stories is that Jesus, as a young boy, responded in anger and killed a bird. And then he picked up the bird, breathed into it, and the bird flew off again. So this idea that we recognize, and this is why it was not accepted as part of the church canon, is the idea that it showed Jesus in anger, and it showed him destroying something, but then it also showed him bringing it back to life. And it's interesting to consider, but if we believe that Jesus was the Son of God, when did he understand that he was the Son of God? At what moment? Much like when did Moses realize that he had a special calling to be the Savior of his people? At what moment did Jesus recognize that he was the Son of God? And what would Jesus have been like as a teenager? Can you even imagine? How could you have won an argument? Imagine being Mary, his mother. How could you have possibly argued with that child? It would have been impossible. So, while the ideas of Jesus may be similar to those of Buddhism, there's no direct connection and there's no historical connection that Jesus had any connection with these people at all. The imagery that we consider when we think about Christianity versus Buddhism is also starkly different. Here we see a photo of the Buddha dying peacefully on a nice cushion with all of his followers around him, praying for him. Very peaceful. And then we see the stark contrast of Jesus, abandoned by all of those who love him, being crucified, nailed to a cross, and eventually dying. An interesting note, this doesn't have anything to do with this, but for those of you who are interested in Islam's perspective on Jesus, Islamic theory actually does not believe that Jesus died on the cross. They reject soundly the idea of Jesus dying at all, because Jesus is a prophet, one of the great prophets of God, like Muhammad, and they could never come to terms with the idea that Jesus, as a prophet, could have lost. They see death and this killing of Jesus as a loss, and so they say that Jesus was crucified, yes, but that he never died on the cross, that he was pulled down, and then later he was assumed into heaven, and that anyone who would say that they were able to kill Jesus was sorely mistaken, that they never killed him. Jesus was assumed into heaven and would return at a later date to battle against the Antichrist with Muhammad. So it's a very interesting story how even though they acknowledge that Jesus is central to their own faith as an important prophet like Moses and Abraham and Muhammad, that they say that Jesus was never crucified. But here we see this stark contradiction between imagery. We see the Buddha dying peacefully and Jesus dying painfully, one living a full life, the other having his life cut short. Buddhists see the centrality of crucifixion in Christianity as an irreconcilable gap between the two belief systems. This is the fun part. So all of these thoughts and ideas lead to really one thing, and that is the teachings of the Buddha. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through some of these teachings, and what I'd ask for you to do is to think about your lives right now. Close your eyes if you'd like, but I know if you're sleeping. So I might call on you if I see you dozing off. But the idea is that we accept those ideas that pertain to us, and we let the other ones go. But think today if any of these messages have any impact. And if they do, I encourage you to pick up a book about the teachings of the Buddha, because they're tremendous teachings that help us center and position our lives. And remember, you can study Buddhist theory and still be a good Christian, and still be a good Jew, and still be a good Muslim. There is nothing that says that you can't also learn and better yourself through these wonderful, the power of meditation. So we'll talk a little bit about Dharma, which means the nature of all things and the truth underlying existence. And this is really what Buddhism is about. It's about discovering our path. That each one of us, if you remember, we talked about that one thing. What is the one thing that's important to all of us? What is the meaning of life? For each one of us, it's different. And so these messages are meant to impact us in different ways based on where we are in our lives. They're going to mean something different to me than they will for you. The teachings of the Buddha can be applied to most situations in our daily lives. Most of us think that when we're in problems or we have troubles, that we're the only ones who have ever had this problem. Our problems are so unique to us. Even though we're adults, we still have difficulty grasping the idea that there is nothing new under the sun. We still think in many ways like children that this is unique to us, that our problems are unique to us, and they're truly not. And what the Buddha shows us is that by applying a proper mentality, you can overcome and change your perspective in any problem. We spend so much time and energy trying to improve our external situations. If we don't have enough money, we work harder. If we don't have a nice enough car, we try to work to get a better car. We try to improve our house, take nicer vacations. And yet, what the Buddha encourages us to do is to look inward and to think about how we're improving the inside of our home, our eternal home. He believes that positive perspective is probably the most important thing to consider. That we all encounter negative feelings, we all encounter negative challenges in our life, but the negative part of it is just in how we perceive it. Remember, the Buddha says that all things are good, and Hinduism says the same thing. All things are good. There is no tomorrow, there is no yesterday, there's only the present moment. All we can do is accept what comes into our life and see it as good, see it as an opportunity, as a challenge, as a mean for growth and improvement, but that there is no such thing as negative. It's how we perceive them that's negative. When we respond to difficult situations with a peaceful mind, we recognize how insignificant most of our problems really are. With the proper perspective, we can see that all of these challenges and difficulties are opportunities for growth and development. True problems arise when we see things with a negative perspective. I'm sure all of you have in your life someone that you'd like to put at the fringe of your life because nothing ever seems to be right with these people. No matter where they are, no matter what they're doing, they can't seem to find happiness. They can be on the same beautiful cruise as you're on right now, and you choose to see all of the benefits and all the beauty, and they choose to see a waiter who comes 10 seconds late with their wine, right? We've all been with these kinds of people, and so what we need to recognize is that that is a choice, the choice that we all make. And if we allow that negativity into our lives, it's like drinking a poison. We can spit it out, but that bitter taste still remains. Peace comes from within. Peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. This is the core tradition of almost every spiritual religion that's ever been. The idea that we can't find happiness, we can't find satisfaction from outside of us, from buying, from other relationships, that we need to find that contentment and that peace from within. It's okay to enjoy the good things in life. In fact, we should. It's part of what the universe has provided us, or part of what God has provided us. But don't let these things distract you from the joy that's within you. Because when it distracts you from seeking your inner joy, you get disconnected and you become attached. And in that attachment is when we find pain. Control your thoughts, or it will control you, or they will control you. What and how you think impacts the actions that you take. The Buddha says, to enjoy good health, to bring true happiness to one's family, to bring peace to all, one must first discipline and control one's mind. If a man can control his mind, he can find the way to enlightenment, and all wisdom and virtue will naturally come to him. Look at that word, naturally. If you seek virtue, if you seek wisdom, and if you control your mind, good things will come to you. How many of you have heard of the law of attraction? If you haven't, take a look at the book. It's called The Secret. And it's this wonderful idea of the law of attraction that when we surround ourselves with positive, whether it's positive people, positive thoughts, positive ideas, positive influence, you know what happens? Positive things happen. But if we surround ourselves with watching 24 hours of streaming news that only focuses on the negative. You know, people say, the media just doesn't cover any of the good stories. I said, you wouldn't watch it even if they did. There's a reason there's 40 or 50 news channels that broadcast constant war and strife, and there's no such thing as the peace channel. No one would watch it. We'd be bored out of our minds. It's our natural inclination to seek derisiveness, divisiveness. And we need to recognize that about ourselves, that the media didn't create us. We were there long before the media. It's our propensity to desire these kinds of things, and the media simply gives us exactly what we ask for. It's like when I tell people they complain about how small the seats are on their airplane. I said, you guys asked for that. You only buy the cheapest tickets, and the cheapest tickets are always on the cheapest airlines that have the smallest seats. So the other airlines learned there's no sense providing bigger seats because no one wants to pay for it. So now you end up paying for the extra bags, you pay for all the extra things. And they say, well, I don't know why the airlines did that. You asked for it. You just got what you wanted. But the point is, we don't think about what we want. And when we don't think about what we want, and we want it nonetheless, we end up getting exactly what we want, which is exactly what we don't want. How's that for the great paradox? Hey. It's your mind, not your enemy, that lures you to evil ways. We talked about this before, this idea that when I grew up, and probably for most of you, you have the idea of the angel on your shoulder and the devil on the other shoulder, that there's something from outside that's tempting you. And the Buddha says, it's your mind. And if you want to blame that on someone else, you can sure do that, but you can blame people all your life and never change your condition. It's only when you accept responsibility that your mind is either your greatest friend or your greatest enemy that you can truly be independent and strive towards enlightenment. That the idea that your mind is what leads you astray. And so if you can control your thoughts, you can control your destiny and control wisdom and enlightenment. All wrongdoing arises because of the mind. If a mind is transformed, what wrongdoing can remain? Right? If we think differently, won't we act differently? So if we change our mind, we will also change our actions. And in changing the actions, we change other people's minds. They change their actions. They change other people's minds, which changes their actions. And we change the world. We are shaped by our thoughts. We become what we think. So this takes it even step, we have Rene Descartes who gets all of the credit. I think, therefore I am. This next idea takes it one step further. Yes, thinking means that you exist, according to Rene Descartes, but how we shape ourselves is we shape ourselves by our thoughts. We are what we think. When the mind is pure, joy follows like a shadow that never leaves. So it doesn't matter where the sun is in the sky. When the mind is pure, your shadow of joy always follows you. Let go of fear. Everyone is afraid. It's natural. However, you can't be happy and live in fear. So if there's anything that you fear, the greatest thing you can do is to confront that fear, to stand up, to look fear in the face, to recognize it, and to engage it. Even death is not to be feared by one who has lived wisely. The whole secret of existence is to have no fear. Never fear what will become of you. Depend on no one. The moment that you reject all help, you will be freed. And this is a really interesting principle of Buddhism, is the idea that you can't be free while depending on someone else for your salvation. So if you rely on someone else for your life, someone else to provide for you, someone else to take care of you, you're never truly free. You are always dependent on someone else. And that makes you fearful because you're constantly in fear of whether or not that person is going to abandon you. It's only when we become independent and self-sufficient that we can truly seek enlightenment. Live in the moment, relish the gift that you experience in this moment, and don't expect others to solve your problems. Dependence on others eliminates personal freedom and responsibility. Health comes from living in the present. The Buddha says that every human being is the author of his own health or disease. Health is the greatest gift, contentment the greatest wealth, faithfulness the best relationship, says the Buddha. The secret of health for both mind and body is not to mourn for the past, worry about the future, or anticipate troubles, but to live in the present moment wisely and earnestly. Thoughts become action. All we are is the result of what we have thought. I had people who used to get upset with me in the seminary because they would complain about things, and I would say, you are exactly where you have chosen to be. And they'd say, well, no, the seminary's telling me to do this, the seminary's telling me to do that. I said, you could walk out the door right now. All of us are the masters of our own destiny. We can choose exactly where we want to go, but we don't make those choices, and consequently, we're left with what we haven't chosen, which in the end becomes exactly what we have chosen. If a man speaks or acts with an evil thought, pain follows him as the wheel follows the hoof of the beast that draws the wagon. If a man speaks with pure thought, happiness follows him like the shadow that never leaves him. The mind is everything. What you think, you become. All wrongdoing arises because of mind. If mind is transformed, what wrongdoing can remain? The Buddha teaches us to be mindful of our thoughts. To allow negative thoughts to enter our mind is to drink poison. Even though we spit out the poison, the bitter taste and the risk of harm remains. This is the lesson about what you do defines you. And this is an enduring argument between Christians as well. Are you saved by faith? Or is it faith and actions? For the one who truly believes that one's actions, one's thoughts, and one's faith determines one's actions, they're inextricably linked, that you can't believe in something and not act accordingly. And so what you do does define you. A man is not called wise because he talks and talks again, but if he is peaceful, loving, and fearless, then in fact he is in truth called wise. A dog is not considered a good dog because he's a good barker. A man is not considered a good man because he's a good talker. However many holy words you read, however many you speak, what good will they do if you do not act upon them? While thoughts may lead to action, it is our actions that determine our fate. Judge a person not by what they say, but by how they act. We're seeing these same recurrence here that come back to us time and again throughout all of these faiths. The Buddha brings them to us so eloquently. Be kind to all. Resolve to be tender with the young, compassionate with the aged, sympathetic with the striving, intolerant with the weak and the wrong. Sometime in your life, you will have been all of these. This is one of my favorites. Because what it really says is, let's not judge each other. Because the thing that you're judging someone for right now, chances are you've already done it or you're going to do it at some point in your life. We all make indiscretions. We all make mistakes. We're all guilty of these things that we accuse others of. Let's be tolerant. Have compassion for all beings, rich and poor alike. Each has their suffering. Some suffer too much, others too little. Teach this triple truth to all. A generous heart, kind speech, and a life of service and compassion are the things which renew humanity. Be thankful. This is one that I try to practice every single day. Let us rise up and be thankful, for if we didn't learn a lot today, at least we learned a little. And if we didn't learn a little, at least we didn't get sick, right? And if we got sick, at least we didn't die. So let us all be thankful. This is such a wonderful lesson, isn't it? You have no cause for anything but gratitude and joy. How true is that? That if we look at our life every single morning with gratitude, what other feeling can we feel except complete gratitude and joy, because everything around us is a gift. When we think maybe we don't deserve it, but we have it nonetheless. Everything is a gift. And like a good gift, we give gratitude, whether or not you believe that gift is from God or coming from within. Giving gratitude allows us to receive more gifts. And as Jesus would have said, it's like the talents. For the man who appreciates that he's been given, he continues to receive more. And for the man who doesn't appreciate and use those talents he's been given, no more will be given to him. There is always something for which to be grateful. Refuse to allow pessimism or negativity into your minds. When faced with sadness or pain, recognize the many thousands of things for which you have to be thankful. Many people went to sleep last night for the very last time. The life rooted in gratitude is the life of contentment. Love heals all things. Hatred does not cease by hatred. We can't stop hatred by hating someone else. No matter how much it may make you feel good in the moment, it's like spilling something on your shirt. You can try to wash it out, but if it's a white shirt, clean, unstained before, it's always going to leave that stain. And so hatred doesn't cease by hatred, but only by love. This is the eternal rule. Christianity calls it the golden rule, but Buddhism calls it the eternal rule. The way is not in the sky, the way is in the heart. Don't look outside for answers. The answers to all of your questions are inside. We simply have to take the time to listen to ourselves and to consider and to correct our thoughts. To conquer oneself is a greater task than conquering others. How true is that? Words have the power to hurt and heal. Whatever words we utter should be chosen with care, for people will hear them and be influenced for good or ill. The tongue, like a sharp knife, kills without drawing blood. Better than 1,000 hollow words is one that brings peace. Anger is its own punishment. This one I particularly like. You will not be punished for your anger. You will, however, be punished by your anger. My wife won't be happy I'm going to say this right now, but I'm going to say it anyways, because it's a great story. We live in Costa Rica, and the driving there is awful. And I think my wife was a truck driver in a past life, because the way she curses sometimes when we're in that car reminds me of the idea that when people are in these other cars, and she's so angry with these drivers. And so we're sitting in the car listening, and I have to remind her that her anger is being wasted on the people inside of this car. The people or the motorcycle that just drove by, they don't know she's angry, but we sure do. And so this anger doesn't punish the person you're angry with, it punishes yourself, because it takes precious moments from your life that you internalize this thing that this other person has done, and you make it your own. And you accept that, you internalize that, and then what we do, we never punish the guilty ones, right? It's like coming home from a hard day at the office. Do we ever tell the person, our boss at the office, what we really think? Nope. But we'll come back and we'll tell our husbands or wives for 2 solid hours what a jerk our boss was. And what we do is we take from ourselves that freedom of the relationship. We take from ourselves those moments of joy that are meant to be shared to edify each other. And what we do is we've allowed that negativity, that pessimism, to bring us down and to affect our positive relationships. So anger is its own punishment, and this is perhaps my favorite one. Holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. You are the one who gets burned. Every single time we want to be angry back with someone, and so we think and we pick up that nasty word, or we pick up this idea of revenge, and we're going to throw it back, but we hold on to it so tight we can't let it go. And we say, I'm going to teach you. And then we open up our hand and we see those devastating burns that we've done to our hands. And not only to our hands, but to our hearts, because it stains us, it burns us, it leaves an indelible mark that we can never get back. We're never going to get that purity back. When we engage in hatred and anger, this is what becomes of us. For those who are free of resentful thoughts, surely find peace. Forgiveness. To understand everything is to forgive everything. This is so difficult, isn't it? To say it is very easy. It's such a short phrase. But when we think that to know everything, to understand everything, is to forgive everything. Because when we understand everything, I've been in your shoes. I know what you're going through. I know why you said what you said. I know why you did what you did. And I forgive you nonetheless, because I know and I understand you. Attachment is loss. You only lose what you cling to. We all have things. Wealthy people have more things. Poor people have fewer things. But even Jesus and the Buddha are alike in this one. There can be no attachment to those things. When they come into your life, be grateful for them, accept them, be thankful for them, and then let them go. Because if we understand that the underlying nature of our universe and our life is change, that what I have today, someone else will have tomorrow, and what I have today, someone else had yesterday, we understand that all things are change. But when we hold on to it, when we say that that thing is mine, and poor people can be just as guilty of this as wealthy people, when what we have we are unwilling to share or we're unwilling to let go of, we become attached to it, and we depend on it, and then when we lose it, it creates pain. And so the phrase is, happiness lies not in receiving what you want, but in wanting and being grateful for what you already have. And in that gratitude means to let it go equally, to not hold on to it, because it causes you pain when you lose it. No one can walk your path but you. No one saves us but ourselves. No one can and no one may. We must ourselves walk the path. Happiness never decreases by being shared. Thousands of candles are lit from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared. This one is great. Imagine if all leaders said this. Believe nothing, no matter where you read it or who has said it, even the internet, quote. Not even if I have said it, unless it agrees with your own reason and your own common sense. So the Buddha said, a truth is always a truth. It's not a truth today and false tomorrow. So if I'm saying something to you today and you say, you know what? It just doesn't make sense to me. Question it. Don't believe it, because all truths will bear themselves out in time. The truth always comes out. 3 things cannot be long hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth. Isn't that wonderful? Doubt separates, trust unites. There is nothing more dreadful than the habit of doubt. Doubt separates people. It's a poison that disintegrates friendships and breaks up pleasant relations. It is a thorn that irritates and hurts. It is a sword that kills. And so we have to today, this is an age of divisiveness, isn't it? But we think that this is unique to us. It's not. This has been long the case, that whenever there is unity, whenever there is success, there are people who try to break others apart. And so we always have to be cautious of the person who tries to divide us, who tries to create division among us. The idea that nobody is more deserving of your love than you. The Buddha says, you can search throughout the entire universe for someone who is more deserving of your love and affection than you are yourself. And that person is not to be found anywhere. You yourself, are as much as anybody in the entire universe deserve your love and affection. Replace jealousy with admiration. Don't be jealous of others' good qualities, but out of admiration, adopt them to yourself. We often say that what we don't like in others, we often dislike most in ourselves. And yet, what we see in others that we like, we often don't appreciate in ourselves, and we don't try to model and emulate that. We see that as a cause for jealousy, and instead we should see it as a cause for admiration, and that we should adopt these practices to ourselves, says the Buddha. Reject all attachment. To live a pure, unselfish life, one must count nothing as one's own, even in the midst of abundance. So this is really why Jesus says it's easier for a poor man to get into the kingdom of heaven. Because for a wealthy man, it's easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle. Remember that phrase? It's easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a wealthy man to enter the kingdom of heaven. And so we say, why? The reason is because when we're wealthy, we hold on to things. That's the point of wealth, isn't it? To accumulate unto oneself. But the truly wealthy person has no need for these kinds of accumulations. And if you have them, be equally willing to part with them, because it's the attachment that binds us to this place and binds us to the possession as opposed to the life that we want to live. It binds us to our own ego. Choose your friends wisely. We're often telling our children this, but an insincere and evil friend is more to be feared than a wild beast. A wild beast may wound your body, but an evil friend will wound your mind. And on the other side, a good friend who points out mistakes and imperfections and rebukes evil is to be respected as if he reveals the secret of a hidden treasure. We often get upset with that friend who tells us the truth, right? But the Buddha says that these are the friends that we want to have around us. Surround yourself with good people. He is able who thinks he is able. So if you can think it and you believe you can do it, you sure can. Be true to yourself. The only real failure in life is to not be the true self, the true to the best one knows. Patience. A jug fills drop by drop. Nothing happens quickly that's worthwhile. Stay healthy. Keep the body in good health as a duty. Otherwise, we shall not be able to keep our mind strong and clear. My wife must have put this one in there. I didn't even know how this one got in here. Seek to understand. In a controversy, the instant we feel anger, we have already stopped striving for the truth and have begun striving for ourselves. Think about that one. When we become angry at anything, what we're effectively saying is, I've let this become my ego now. Now my ego must defend itself. And so instead of seeking the truth, we're no longer interested in the truth because we're already defending ourselves, right? When we get into an argument sometimes, and I hear people, and I catch myself doing it from time to time too, maybe you do as well, but I stopped listening to that other person and listening to what they're saying, and I'm already planning what I'm going to say next, right? Because I'm so angry. I'm going to make sure that this person hears exactly what I've got on my mind. And when I do that, I realize I'm no longer thinking about the truth. I want to win the argument, right? We want to win because it's a zero-sum game, right? One of us has got to win and the other's got to lose. And that's where the problem comes in. We should always be concerned with the truth. And whatever path is required to get us to the truth is the path that we should take. And to involve our ego is to let our anger and our self get in the way of seeking the truth. Even Stephen Covey said, seek to understand first, then to be understood. And it was Jesus who said that first, didn't he? When you feel anger rising, let it cease. Listen to others, understand their perspective, and you will have more peace. And this is a tough one for me. Be more concerned with being happy than being right. Man, don't we love to be right? That's why we argue. If you don't want to be right, you'll never argue. We only argue because we want to be right and we want to win. And the Buddha says, focus first on being happy. Let being right come second. The idea that we are all one is important. He who experiences the unity of life sees his own self in all beings and all beings in his own self and looks on everything with an impartial eye. This is when you know that you've achieved that step next to enlightenment, is when you look at everyone and you feel no impartiality. You feel no greater love for anyone else than you feel for yourself. You feel no anger for anyone any more than you would for yourself. And you see things all in the way they're supposed to be seen, which is we are all one, we're all connected, and what we do to each other, we do to ourselves. In the sky, there is no distinction of east and west. People create distinctions out of their own minds and then believe them to be true. Think about that one, huh? What was the world like before we created borders and nations? Must have been a wonderful place where we just all walked around freely and enjoyed. Of course, I like air conditioning, so I'm not going to go back. But the point is that we create these distinctions ourselves. They're figments of our imaginations. When we look at a map, there's no line that defines these countries. We'd like there to be in some places, but at last, there are no distinctions between any of these places, and there's no distinction between any one of us. Jesus said, in the end, there are only three things that matter. Let's say them together. What are they? Faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of these is love. And the Buddha said, in the end, these things matter most. How well did you love? How fully did you live? And how deeply did you let go? There is no path to happiness. Happiness is the path. So for those of us who are saving, hoping for that great day, looking forward to doing the one thing that we've been waiting to do for such a long time, that's not the path to happiness. The path to happiness is engaging in what you have right now and enjoying it right now. This should be the code for Viking. It's better to travel well than to arrive. And it was the Buddha who first said that. Life is about the journey. Let us be happy, content, and satisfied where we are today. Don't put off your happiness or save your happiness for another time. Travel well today. Enjoy the journey. I think we all believe that a little bit, right? Or a lot. Life is perfect just the way it is. To think otherwise is to delude yourself and to seek that which you cannot have. Life is perfect just the way it is. And in the words of the Buddha, when you realize how perfect everything is, you will tilt your head back and laugh to the sky. I look at the Buddha and I think, when I read this, I picture a really fat baby laughing. Could there be anything more beautiful than a really fat baby laughing? And that's what I think about when I think of the Buddha. And you think, when you realize how perfect everything is, you're going to tilt your head back and you're going to laugh, because that's the joy of life. We often don't appreciate those beautiful things in our life when we have them. And so the greatest goal and gift in life is to be able to recognize your blessing, to recognize the abundance of your life in the present moment, because the present moment is all that we have, says the Buddha. And with that, good people, I leave you. The Buddha in me salutes the Buddha in you. Thank you all very much. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.